Okay, as always, we'll be checking in with the markets for the end of the program. So let's get to talk about the budget. Is still the big elephant in the room for the week. Let's talk to Babajide Sholanke, who is a fixed income dealer at FSDH Merchant Bank. Is live to us from FMDQ Exchange Place in downtown Lagos. Thank you, Babajide. Good morning.
Good morning, Bolson. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Good to see you again. I'm sure you folks who are dealers and research analysts in strategists in investment banks and trading houses who spend the last 48 hours trying to unpack President Buhari's budget proposal. So on the spending, monetary, whatever side, what wasn't it for you? What have you guys at FSDH, what have you guys found?
Well, like you said, you know, it's a Boston in town, the budget 2020 presentation by the president, and it's made his intention very bare. Fiscal policy, of course, handled by the federal government, had been made bare by that presentation. The monetary policy hang still remains in the terms that if you look at the monetary policy communique of the central bank over and over again, you see that they'll be using monetary policy to solve fiscally induced problems in the system. And of course, you know, this is understandable because eventually at the end of the day, the monetary instability can actually cause more problems and actually make everybody worse off in the system. So what we're seeing in this budget is that it's still going to be the same, game, in town in terms of the fiscal expectation of the monetary policy is not going to be that really met. And what I mean by that is that the monetary authorities have always talked about, capital expenditure, to his business in terms of the cost push element in the system. And you understand that the inflation rate that we have in Nigeria is actually cost push inflation, which is not a demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, cost, by the high cost of doing business. And of course, capital expenditure in terms of roads, in terms of power, and all of that is going to help to reduce that. And you see that in the budget 2020 presentation, it's about 24% of the total budget, far below even the federal government economic fundamentals in terms of the economic recovery growth plan. Economic recovery growth plan, which the federal government says is going to be the basis for its economic policy going forward, recommended 30%, and the federal government says it's going to do only 24%. Of course, the federal government actually made excuse along the way, saying that okay, they expect the private sector to participate in capital formation in terms of capital infrastructure going forward and incentivizing them. We'll see how that plays out. But the reality is that the fiscal policy have made the intention bare. There's going to be new borrowings into the system. They've actually defined such borrowings includes the Cook bond, diaspora bond, and green bonds. And of course, the external borrowing rate is going to grow. Of course, interest expense is going to grow. And central bank is going to try to rein in those interest expense via tight monetary policies now. So we just continue to see how this pans out. But the truth of the matter is that the budget presentation is last to be matched with the medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper. These are the three papers that are going to the National Assembly. Everybody always buzz about the budget. Of course, the budget is the biggest factor, but it's the medium-term expenditure framework, which is the foundation that defines the budget, and the fiscal strategy paper. The National Assembly is going to look at all these elements, and form its own opinion as well. And we hope they do not jack up the oil price, because the federal government has been very conservative in that regard.
So whatever was said in the budget and that economic document presented Tuesday by Mr. President will have serious implications for the monetary authorities. So 24 hours after the IMF released a staff report on Nigeria and advised that there are large amounts of maturing central bank treasury bills and how to manage vulnerabilities and this fiscal deficit spending, one of the advice is for the central bank to introduce longer-term government instruments to mop up excess liquidity. So we agree there will be a lot of liquidity moving forward, or should we issue more longer-dated government instruments?
Well, that's a fantastic. It's even based on the principle of finance. By the time when you look at it from the perspective of, longer-dated assets should be generated, longer-dated liabilities should finance longer-dated assets. That's the basic. So government should borrow long-term, so that the liabilities match with their asset. So what we've seen is that we've seen a significant amount of short-term debt in terms of government borrowing, short-term to finance, long-term borrowing. So there's a mismatch in terms of funding. And if you look again, even at the proposal of the federal government actually alluded that there's an anomaly in what is going on, because capital expenditure it hasn't been fully released in 2019 budget. As at June, hardly any money has been released for capital expenditure, and about 1.35 trillion was released out of the total estimate. And what has released, you find out that even at that period, federal government is saying that the total deficit is about 1.35, which is about the exactly amount for the whole of the year. And they said that where is that deficit coming from? Deficit spending coming actually from recurrent expenditure. That capital expenditure is going to help to ease the cost of doing business. So the argument going forward is that there is that a possibility that we'll continue to see the federal government issuing short-dated securities like open market operation and federal government through the primary market auctions to modulate liquidity in the system as have these maturities coming. But it's just sound finance that the IMF is talking about, which is what we should continue to look at. The federal government is aware of that. They're looking for a way to rein in that. But that is not within their control because the fundamental, the background of all of this is consequent upon crude oil price. And if you look at what's happening in terms of the global demand for crude oil, because of the global crisis happening, particularly the global trade crisis between the United States and China, which is reducing the demand for crude oil, that is significant negative external shock for the federal government earnings going forward, of course, which is going to mean that we're still going to have that situation of the federal government having to borrow short term to smooth out its fiscal deficit as we move forward. The IMF warning is out there. It's always been out there, but it's essentially beyond our control. It's essentially on the side of what happens to crude oil price in the international market. That's why the central bank continues to mention that the federal government over and over again needs to increase capital expenditure, and capital expenditure is hardly hard out there. Just to add, finally, even that budget proposed by President Buhari, he actually did mention that having had so much deficit in 2019 with that capital expenditure part of it, but current expenditure contributes to that, they're now going to begin to release aggressively. The capital expenditure, about 600 billion, is going to be released at the end of 2019. Of course, you know what that means. Central bank has been saying that fiscal injection is a major threat to inflation stability going forward. So the threats are out there, but like I said in summary, the federal government cannot say that they will not borrow short term, because what will determine that is outside our control is crude oil price, and it's essentially out of our control.
So you think the way things are now, the fiscal authorities need to raise their game, raise this game, as it were, before they crash the central bank?
Can you say that again? I didn't get that.
Yes, the fiscal authorities will need to raise the game before the central bank become overloaded or broken.
Yes. Yes, you are very happy. You are very happy. So that's the reality. Central bank has never shied away from saying that over and over again. And look at the economic recovery growth plan, which is the economic strategy paper for the federal government. The federal government has come out to tell us that they are going to be spending 30% of every annual budget on capital expenditure to improve the ease of doing business, to improve a business environment, to reduce the impact of cost push factors in the system. But in the 2020 budget, the federal government is using 24%. Rather than the 30% that they actually said they were going to do. I understand that fiscal constraint could be a factor, but they can't shy away from that. The federal government needs to rein in its expenses. They need to reduce the pressure on the central bank. The central bank attempt to use monetary policy to grow the economy is strangulating the economy in one way or the other, and it's a huge burden that the federal government have to ease the central bank of.
So to wrap it up, yesterday, if we look at the treasuries market at the secondary window, we finished off late last week around 12, a little bit above that in terms of yields for short-dated treasuries. But here I'm looking at about 11.75%.
Well, but so you just actually captured it. One today, as I was just getting here, my colleagues in the office, they're just briefing me that there's a normal maturity which the central bank is going to mop up today, and they're going to take about 80 billion. We're expecting maturity about 247 billion, which means the central bank is even actually willing to leave some money in the system, despite the fact that they want to control the money, the liquidity not to be inflationary. They still don't want to strangle the system in terms of liquidity. Liquidity being sucked out and taking interest rates higher. But having said all of that, what we've seen is that central bank has been doing a good job, excellently. What I mean by that, they've been doing a good job to reduce the interest expense of the federal government. If you look at the secondary market activity and the open market operation of the central bank, it's been such that the rates have been coming down, whether at the auctions, primary auction, and the secondary market. And that's good news, which means that it's cheaper for the federal government. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you so much. And this is going to be a very, very awful difficult for me to say we need to let that conversation end around there today. I'm sure it's quite a lot. Thank you so much, but I've got a deadline to meet as well. I've got a regulator in here, and they're telling me so we need to wrap up. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. We thank our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thank you very much, Sri Lanka of FSDH Merchant Bank out of FMDQ Exchange Place in downtown. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow, Friday. Let's have a TGIF by then, shall we?